My name is Adam Eilath, and I think most of you I have not had the pleasure of meeting in person, and I hope when the health situation is better, we can do so at a JCC event. I'm the head of school, just starting my second year at Wornick Jewish Day School, which is on the same campus as the JCC, if you don't already know it. And we are a transitional kindergarten through 8th grade school, community day school. So in addition to being the head of school, I'm also a Jewish educator, and I'm teaching Jewish studies at the school this year. And I also happen to come from a Sephardic background. And so I thought, I knew that there were a lot of different educators teaching tonight about different, or teaching over the past month about different topics. And I thought I could offer something from my tradition. So I am of a Sephardic background, and my family comes from Tunisia in North Africa. And one of the features that's different about Sephardic Judaism is the tefillah, the prayer service. And I think one of the times when it's most different is on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And I thought what I would do today is share 3 piyutim, which are liturgical poems with you all that are read on Rosh Hashanah. I'm going to share 2 from Rosh Hashanah and 1 from Yom Kippur, and speak a little bit about them. But first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. I have a little presentation for you. And can I get a thumbs up that you can see my screen? Awesome, wonderful. So I thought I would first, I don't know what everyone's background is here, and maybe we can hear about it in the question period at the end, but I thought I would just first define some terms for us all. So I know that many of us think that there are 2 types of Jews, Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews, but there are actually many different types of Jews. And I brought this map just to sort of speak about the countries and the backgrounds that I'm going to be speaking about today. So the reddish pink colors represent Sephardic countries, and the green countries represent Mizrahi countries, which is a term you may be familiar with as well. I'm going to toggle back and forth between 2 slides right now. The term Sephardic comes from the Hebrew word Sepharad, which means Spain, and Sephardic refers to descendants from the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisition, so from the Iberian Peninsula, who later populated lots of different places in the world, not only North Africa and the Middle East. They went to places like Amsterdam, Italy, even France a long time ago, Turkey, many places in the Ottoman Empire, North Africa, and the Middle East. In America, we often say that if you're not Ashkenazi, you're Sephardic, but that's not an accurate term. Toggling back, if you're from a country like Yemen, you're not Sephardic. Your family was never in Spain unless they went there on an organized trip in the past 50 years, and they're not going to be from Spain. That's not going to change. But it's easy for us to have these binaries, Sephardic and Ashkenazi. So in America, for the past, I think century, we've referred to all non-Ashkenazi Jews as Sephardic, necessarily accurate. I want to also say that the term Mizrahi also is not a perfect term. I don't know how many of you have heard the term Mizrahi before, but it comes from the Hebrew word Mizrach, which means east, and it literally means Easterner. It actually has a wee bit of a pejorative connotation. So in Israel, it was used as a catch-all designation to capture many non-Ashkenazi communities representing places throughout North Africa and the Middle East. But if we look carefully on the map, we can see very clearly, well, I know all maps are flawed, but Morocco, which I'm pointing to here, is not east of a place like Poland or Russia. And so the term Mizrahi, Easterner, is not also very accurate as well. So I bring these up to just identify a little bit about what the groups I'm going to be speaking about today, to ensure that we're using the right language. I'm going to use the word Sephardic because it's the easiest term to use today, but I want to acknowledge that it's a term that's a little bit flawed, and it's flawed here in America as well. Even though there are differences between every single community, in the liturgy from a country like Morocco is different than Algeria and Tunisia and Libya and Egypt and Yemen, there are some common denominators in the liturgy between all of these different Jewish ethnic groups. And some of those common denominators include piyutim, which is the Hebrew word for a liturgical poem, being a focal point of the prayer service. Now, piyutim are very popular in North African and Middle Eastern communities, as well as Balkan communities. But the entire Jewish community actually is probably familiar with piyutim. You may know the song Adon Olam, which is sung in, I believe, all congregations. That's an example of a piyut. It's a liturgical poem that was composed after the Bible, and it's devotional. It speaks about God. A piyut can speak about lots of different topics. There are piyutim about holidays, dozens of piyutim, hundreds of piyutim about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. There are piyutim about life cycle events. So when both of my daughters were born, I had dozens of piyutim that I could draw upon to sing and rejoice in their birth. Piyutim were also composed for political reasons. So during World War II, when the Nazis occupied North Africa and other places in the Balkans, Jews wrote piyutim begging for God to rid them of the German occupation in Tunisia or the Italian occupation of Libya. Piyutim were composed for all sorts of reasons. And what's really neat about piyutim that I want to convey to all of you is they reflect an intimate knowledge of Hebrew and of biblical grammar. So piyutim are sort of like a Jewish educator's dream, because in Jewish communities throughout North Africa and the Middle East, studying Hebrew was a top priority. And it wasn't just studying Hebrew and going to Hebrew school just so you knew how to read prayers and just so you knew how to read holy texts. It was studying Hebrew so you could speak it, so you could write and communicate in it, and so that you could be creative in it. So in the moments of your deepest emotional pain or joy, you could compose a piyut to reflect the feelings that you're experiencing. And I think what's really neat about piyutim is that when I go to a Sephardic synagogue, I can read a piyut not just from 2,000 years ago or 1,000 years ago from Spain. I can read a piyut from 50 years ago or 40 years ago. It's a reflection of a beautiful reality. The Jewish canon never closes. If you're really familiar with Hebrew, if you're really comfortable in Hebrew, you are always part of adding to the Jewish canon and the Jewish tradition. And so some of my favorite piyutim come from a poet named Asher Mizrahi, who was born in Jerusalem and then lived in Italy, Malta, Tunisia, and then returned to Jerusalem in the 70s. And he wrote hundreds and thousands of piyutim about political issues, about life cycle issues, about existential issues. And I often draw on those piyutim in my moments of pain or joy myself. Another kind of neat thing that I want to share about piyutim is that they were often composed to local melodies. So if you're familiar with some of the major pop stars of the Middle East in the last 100 years, like Kulthum or Muhammad Abdul Wahab from Egypt, or Farid al-Atrash, Jewish rabbis and poets composed piyutim to the tunes of famous pop music in the Middle East. And they did that for a couple of reasons. One, they were trying to sort of fight what you might call like the generational slide. So like the youth getting too focused on pop music and not focusing on religious issues. And so a really famous paitan, a really famous poet, Rav David Buzaglo from Morocco in Casablanca, would listen to the radio on Thursday nights. On Fridays are the holy days in the Muslim calendar, and would hear the latest song being released on the radio. He would then stay up all night and figure out how to write a Jewish devotional prayer to that song. And then on Friday in the morning, already by the morning, all of the youth of Casablanca would gather in a synagogue and listen to the poems he composed, the latest pop songs. He did it very, very quickly. And Harav Ovadia Yosef, Zichron Livracha, who was the chief Sephardic rabbi of Israel and one of the most famous political figures in the modern state of Israel, had a very famous statement about the use of Arab songs. And for many of you, you may know the famous, well, I guess it was popularized by Jimmy Cliff, by the rivers of Babylon, which originally comes from the Jewish tradition. And in that song, by the rivers of Babylon, Al Naharat Bavel, it says the words Al Aravim betocha talinu kinorotenu, which means on willows we hung our harps. But Ovadia Yosef reinterpreted willows, Aravim, as not Arava, like a willow, but Aravim, Arabs. And he said, on the Arabs we hung our harps, meaning we took the most famous songs of Kulthum and the famous pop stars of Egypt, and we hung our melodies on their tunes. So that was just a very brief introduction to Piyutim. I want to now share a little bit about the role of Piyutim in the month of Elul and in the high holidays. So many of you know that in the month of Elul, starting after Shabbat, before Rosh Hashanah, in Ashkenazi communities, you start reciting Selichot. And these are prayers of forgiveness, where you recite the 13 attributes of God. Different in North African and Middle Eastern communities and communities from the Balkans, you begin reciting Selichot. And I have a book here of Selichot. It's a very thin book. And so I read this every day before starting my morning prayers, or if I'm up late enough, I can start at night. And this is a small book that involves some poems and the 13 attributes of God. And we start reciting this on the first day of Elul. And we recite it for 40 days from the beginning of Elul until Yom Kippur. We also recite Selichot in the high holiday services as well, especially in Yom Kippur. It's recited 4 times. And what's interesting about the Selichot service as well is that when the 13 attributes of God are recited, North African and Middle Eastern Jews completely prostrate themselves on the ground. So when we hear the words, and God hovered above in front of the face of, I'm not good at translating all the words, but there's the words of God revealing God's self to Moses. And when those words are recited, you literally bow down with your face as close to the ground as possible. So I share that because it's going to touch on a theme that I'm going to hopefully speak about shortly, which is that one of the purposes of the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur service and the use of poems is to emotionally transform the person praying. And that's not only done through reading words, it's also done through physical actions. So I want to share with you a couple of poems that are features of the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur service. And I want to just state that these poems are not recited in European communities. So there is a fixed liturgy in European communities in an Ashkenazi synagogue, and you may be familiar with some of the major poems in Rosh Hashanah, like Hayom Harat Olam, or Avinu Malkeinu, or some of the things that you maybe, are sort of like the top 20 hits in Ashkenazi communities. These poems that I'm going to share with you now are not recited. In Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, many of the poems come from Spain, specifically from Spain, from the golden age of Spain, where Hebrew was, there was a lot of production in the Hebrew language. And I'm going to share a couple of poems with you. I'm also going to sing some of them for you. So the first poem I want to share with you is called Achot Kitana. And it is a poem that Achot Kitana in English means the little sister. And it's derived from a verse in the Song of Songs, in chapter 8 of the Song of Songs, where the people of Israel are compared to a young sister, and the sister has not yet matured. She's not yet gone through puberty. And the people of Israel are compared to a little sister, and in the Song of Songs it says, "My little sister, when you finally grow and go through puberty, what will become of you when a suitor comes to ask for your hand?" And for those of you who don't know the Song of Songs, the entire book is read every single Friday night in Sephardic communities. And so Achot Kitana is a plea to the Jewish people who have not yet gone through puberty. And puberty here is a metaphor for maturing. It's a metaphor for being ready for love. And the love that the little sister will experience when she goes through puberty is the love of being married to God. So I want to read for you the words in English, and then I will recite it in Hebrew for you, and just speak about the significance of it from my machzor. So the words are as follows: the little sister, her prayers she prepares and proclaims her praises. O God, please heal now her ailments. Let the year and its curses conclude. And again, this phrase is repeated. Let the year and its curses conclude. With pleasant words she calls upon you, and with song and raises, for such befits you. Why do you avert your eyes? Look, enemies devour her heritage. Let the year and its curses conclude. Tend to your sheep that the lions dispersed, and pour your wrath upon those who say, destroy. Your right hand's foundation, vine, they have breached, and plucked, not even leaving her tiny grapes. Let the year and its curses conclude. So I'll recite it for you, and then I'll speak a little bit about the significance of this prayer. I'll recite just a couple of verses.
אחות קטנה תפילותיה, וכבעונה תהילותיה, אל נא רפנה למחלותיה, תכלה שנה וקללותיה. בנועם מילים לך תקרא, ושיר והילולים כי לך נאה, עד מה תעלים עיניך ותראה. זרים אוכלים נחלותיה, תכלה שנה וקללותיה. רצונך ריות זרו, ושפוך ארונך באומרי מרו, וחנת ימינך פרצו והרו, לא הישירו עלילותיה, תכלה שנה וקללותיה.
So the purpose of this poem is to describe a weak people of Israel, actually. It's not a strong people of Israel. It's not a strong Jewish people entering the high holidays. It's a Jewish people who are trampled, sheep that lions dispersed, vines that have been breached, fruit that has been plucked and not even tiny grapes have been left. And it's actually the beginning of a story. It's the beginning of the story of a Jewish people who don't have a temple, who have been exiled from their lands, who have been persecuted. And it's a sympathetic way of describing the Jewish people that before we even start talking about our sins, we need to remind ourselves that the Jewish people are not in a position of power. Of course, this poem was written in the 13th century in Spain by a rabbi named Avraham Girondi. Just by the way, he was from a small village outside of Barcelona, Girona, where I believe there's actually an airport now, a low-cost airport that Ryanair popularized. And one more thing about the author before I continue is this is actually I don't know the word for this in poetry, but it's an acrostic that uses the name of the author. So Avraham, so Achot, you can see here Aleph, Be, Avraham, Resh, and it continues. The next verse begins with Mem, Matai. The next verse begins with Hey. So it follows his name, which was a way of poets identifying themselves through poetry writing by having their names be the first letter of every verse. But it's a reminder that we are in exile. It's a reminder that we've been persecuted, and it's a plea that God looks upon us favorably and realizes that we are not in a great condition, and we're in no place to necessarily have had a great year from the perspective of fulfilling mitzvot or being a very good people. So maybe what I'll do is instead of just to kind of break up me talking, I'm just wondering, let me turn off, I can turn off, so we're a small group. Actually, you should be allowed to unmute yourself now. Are there any questions about this poem, Achot Kitana, that you would like to ask? Yeah, Yael, please.
My response is that the Shekhinah is the Achot Kitana.
Aha.
And it doesn't say Achoti HaKtana, it's Achot Kitana. It's just striking me that the Shekhinah is this unfortunate one.
Huh.
Her heritage is being devoured.
Interesting. It's interesting. That's a beautiful read, and my understanding has always been that it's referring to the people of Israel, but it's also what you're saying, Yael, I think, is that it's not only the people of Israel who are exiled; it's also God's presence, which is absent from us, which is really beautiful. Thank you. Yeah. Any other comments or questions about this poem? Okay. Wonderful. So I'm going to continue now, and I'm going to share. Sorry, the formatting looks a little off, but hopefully you can see. I'm going to move now to one of the most dramatic points in the Rosh Hashanah service. And as many of you know, the Torah reading for Rosh Hashanah is the reading of Akedat Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac. And it's the binding of Isaac is a very perplexing, troubling, moving text. I want to share that even though the binding of Isaac is read on Rosh Hashanah, many of you might know that the binding of Isaac is also read every single morning in tefillah. The first thing that you do after you put on your tefillin, or if you're not wearing tefillin, the first thing that you do in the morning, really before you start with the blessings of the day, is you're meant to read the story of Akedat Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac. I want to share one thing, a personal note before I start on this poem, which is that my grandfather of blessed memory, Nisim, who grew up in Tunisia and lived his final years in Jerusalem, I had the privilege of living in Israel when he was at the end of his life. And unfortunately, he suffered from dementia in his final years. And I come from a very large family, and some of my cousins volunteered with me to take turns in the morning and to go to his house and help my grandfather put on tefillin. He lived in Mea Sharim in Jerusalem, a very religious neighborhood, and we would help him put on his philanthropies and his tefillin in the morning, and we would help him recite his prayers. And one thing that happened when he was not able to recognize us, and when his dementia had become acute, is that he would cry every morning during the reading of Akedat Yitzchak. And during his eulogy, one of my cousins, Yehuda, aptly mentioned that this notion that when our physical body weakens, our soul often becomes stronger. And there was something that my grandfather clearly grasped about Akedat Yitzchak, about the binding of Isaac, that we didn't. There's one poem that is, I would say, I think it's unanimously recognized as the most moving portion of the Rosh Hashanah service in North African and Middle Eastern communities. And when the Torah Ark is open, you recite this poem called Et Sha'arei Ratzon Lehipateach. Et in Hebrew means the hour, the time. Sha'arei means the gates. And Ratzon, here it's translated as good, but it can mean will. It can mean God having the mercy. Lehipateach are open. In Sephardic communities, I don't know how many of you have been to a Sephardic synagogue before on high holidays. You bid for everything. So you have to bid for the different honors. So when I say bid, it's literally an auction. And this is usually one of the highest bid. This is the privilege to recite this poem it goes for a lot of money. And I grew up in Canada, and there was never a chance that I could have afforded it in my synagogue growing up, this prayer. But when I moved to the Bay Area, I originally lived in San Francisco, and there it was a smaller congregation. And one year I thought I had a shot at winning the honor of Et Sharei Ratzon. And alas, there was a high roller in the congregation who was outbidding me, but he took mercy on me. He actually founded like, I think one of the original food delivery services, like Grubhub or something. So he took mercy on me and said, let's split it. Let's go in even. And we got to recite it together. And it was a huge privilege for me. And I held my daughter reading it, which was a unique moment because at the time, my eldest daughter was very small. And it was a very interesting moment because I was reciting this very long poem that is ultimately about the pain of sacrificing, of Abraham being willing to sacrifice his firstborn. The poem Et Sharei Ratzon, which was written by Rabbi Yehuda ibn Abbas, also in Spain in the 12th century, repeats 3 words in every stanza. It's a very long poem. It takes about 10 minutes to read. I just brought you 3 stanzas today. And those words are Oked, V'hane'ekad, V'hamizbeach. The binder, Avraham, the bound, Isaac, and the altar. And this poem is beautiful because it personifies the altar. This poem actually personifies every single thing in the story of the binding of Isaac. I'll share one more thing, which is this poem. My grandmother shared this with me, that if a woman was having trouble during childbirth and there was fear that the woman might pass away while she was giving birth or that the child might not survive, the rabbi would ask the entire class of young children to come outside of the delivery room and recite this poem. So maybe what I'll do is I'll actually sing the poem first, and then I will read it and speak a little bit about the verses from it. So let me just get to the place in my machzor for it. Second.
Adam, is this poem found in the Ashkenazic liturgy as well, or is it
not
absolutely a Sephardic liturgy?
It's only in the Sephardic tradition, yes.
Okay.
And for some reason, I'm having trouble finding it right now. So maybe what I'll do is I will read directly off my screen. Here we go.
Okay. And were these PO team? Do they have? Do they use cantorial trope as well?
So there is no, like in looking at there are no te'amim in the I found it. There are no te'amim. So I'll show you there are no cantorial notes. So okay. Actually, I think I was mentioning before, piyutim were often composed to the music of the local music. So if you lived in Rhodes, to Turkish music, if you lived in Tunisia. In Tunisia, this poem is so important that it's actually recited in the Slichot service. It also appears in so you actually read it for 40 straight days leading up to Rosh Hashanah. So every country has, I'll read the Tunisian tune, but every country has their own tune for the song. I'll read a couple of verses and then I'll speak about the words.
את שערי רצון להיפתח יומי חפי ליל שוטח אנא זכור נא לי ביום מוכח עוקד והנקד והמזבח באחרית נוסה בסוף העשרה הבן אשר נולד לך משרה אם נפשך בו עד מאוד נקשרה, קומה לעולי לעולה בערה, על הר אשר כבוד לך זורח, עוקד והנקד והמזבח. I'll skip to a moving verse very quickly. ויהמו כל מלאכי מרכבה, אופן ושרף, שואלים בנדבה, מתחננים לאל בעד שר צבא, אנא תנה פדיון וחובר הווה, אל נא יהי עולם בלי ירח, עוקד והנקד והמזבח. So I'll say a couple of words before I explain this poem. One of the reasons that the binding of Isaac, that the story of Akedat Yitzchak is so troubling, is because Abraham shows no emotion. We know that Abraham and Sarah were very old when they had Isaac, that it's all they wanted. That the entire narrative of Abraham and Sarah revolves around Sarah not even believing she can get pregnant. She laughs when she hears that when she hears that she's going to get pregnant. And immediately after this child who they wanted so much, God tells Abraham, go take your child, the one you love, your firstborn, and sacrifice your only child, and sacrifice him. And Abraham just does it like a robot. And Abraham is willing to do it until the moment when he's told, stop. You never see any emotion. You never see Abraham crying. You have no idea what Sarah says in the story and what she feels with her son and husband being gone for 3 days. And it's very troubling. It's troubling that there's not more pain in the story. And this piyut is filled with pain. There's actually no translation that I could find, so this is my translation, and it's not very good. But I want to show you very quickly this other part of the piyut that I just read, which is there's lots of stanzas, but this one describes angels, begging God to not sacrifice Isaac. That the angels of the Merkava, which is a reference to something in the book of Ezekiel, come, Ofan and Saraf, who are sort of angels, come and beg God. They plead with the help of the chief of the army, please don't destroy the sun. And they say this word, which is this phrase, which is so beautiful. How can the world exist without the moon? Al na yehi olam b'li yareach. The world cannot exist without a moon. And we also hear about Sarah in this. I didn't include the verse about Sarah, but it says as Abraham prepared the wood and the altar, tears poured down Sarah's face. Right? The poem is filled with the emotion that we actually all know exists. Now, the binding of Isaac is a powerful metaphor that I know that many people interpret in different ways, and they interpret it as a way of understanding the pain that the Jewish people have gone through, the pain that an individual has to go through in trying to be close and cling to God, to Hashem. But the image of someone sort of blindly going and sacrificing themselves in order to achieve what God is expecting of them is not terribly relatable or personable or realistic. And this drama, this narration of drama that is described in this poem, I feel like actually more accurately captures the pain of this world and a more realistic portrayal of this great mystery of the world. Maybe I'll stop there. Maybe a way we can sort of process this poem is just by asking if you have any questions about this poem. or if you want me to speak about anything else specifically about this poem as well.
The line that you said about the moon,
Yes.
would you talk a little bit about what that
Sure.
means to you?
Sure. So children in Judaism are compared to a moon. As many of you know, a moon lights up. We see different percentages of the moon based on where we are in the month, and a moon lights up the world, right? But the light doesn't actually come from the moon itself, right? The light from the moon is actually a reflection of other light. And the metaphor of a moon being children is that children are vessels in the world that we give light to. And without us giving light to the vessel, our light cannot be, our world cannot be illuminated. And so children are a necessary component of the world that cannot exist without our partnership and us giving light to them. But also the world at nighttime, our darkest times, cannot have light without children. So it's actually a metaphor that can keep, you can keep circling and going deeper and deeper. One of the poems that is recited, a piyut that is recited when a boy is born, not often a girl, there are other poems for girls being born, is a piyut called Yareach Yakar, which means precious moon. So this is, I guess, language that's often described in the North African and Middle Eastern tradition to speak about our children. Children. Yeah.
And then I had another question about, are all this piyut done without any instrumentation at all?
Yes, so great question. So in North African and Middle Eastern communities, denominations don't exist in North African and Middle Eastern communities like Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist. I think in America they often consider themselves Orthodox, but not all people that went to Sephardic synagogues were necessarily Orthodox in the way that you think about them today. There was just a big tent and everyone belonged to one synagogue. But they did follow traditional practices, which means that on holidays where electricity cannot be used and music cannot be played, on holidays they would not be performed with instrumentation. However, during Selichot, when this poem can be recited, can be sung, not on Shabbat and not on a holiday, it was accompanied by music. And piyutim actually are accompanied by music when they're not performed on Shabbat.
Yeah, Adam, the piyutim in Yerushalayim, piyutim are a big period of time for piyutim is Hol HaMoed Sukkot.
Right.
Where you will, virtually, I don't know from every part of the Sephardic community, but if you look at the Balkan community, a lot of their piyutim is performed with instruments,
right.
as are the Yemenites as well.
Right. I'm a little bit less familiar with the Yemenite instrumentation and the instruments they're used, but certainly in the Ottoman world, in the Balkan world, there are a lot of instruments used. And Sukkot, so I would say it's not only Sukkot, also Chol HaMoed Pesach. Mm-hmm. All the three pilgrimage holidays have unique piyutim that are attached to them.
Right. There's one of the things that Avichai does now in Yerushalayim is during Sukkot, Chol HaMoed Sukkot, they will have a festival of piyutim, where every night it's a different country that's the piyutim of that particular country is performed, and it's they bring in piyut singers from all over the world to sing at this and many performers. Shem Tov Levi is known to be a very, very devoted piyut fan, and therefore he performs with different groups.
Right, and a popular thing to do, I think what you were mentioning this, is that people take tours of different synagogues in Jerusalem and all different cities that have lots of synagogues from different ethnic communities. And every night they'll go to a different synagogue to hear a different set of piyutim. So I want to now move to the last. Good night. Okay. Okay. I have some. Okay.
Going to bed now.
Okay. Thank you.
Time for the moon to go to sleep.
Okay. We have an audience here. So, so I want to share now the piyut of Yom Kippur. And I think we know, if I ask you what's the most famous, well-known prayer that is recited the night of Yom Kippur, if I ask you, what would that be?
Kol Nidre.
Kol Nidre, right. So Kol Nidre, I'm going to use hyperbole, is a footnote in a Sephardic service. It is recited 3 times, as is required, but it is not the focal point of Erev Yom Kippur. The focal point is I'm not exaggerating, between half-hour and hour-long poem by Ibn Ezra called Lecha Eli. Ibn Ezra is one of the most famous poets from Spain, also of the Golden Age of Spain, 12th, 13th century. He was a famous grammarian, was an expert in the Hebrew language. Really, all of his biblical commentary is all about grammar, and just a brilliant mathematician as well. He kind of reflects on logic and grammar in his writings. And he wrote, I'll show you in my Yom Kippur Machzor how long it is. So it's these 2 pages, another 2 pages, and another page. So it's a 7-page long prayer that is meant to be recited incredibly slowly. And it takes you on a journey. It takes you on a journey of devotion, of repentance, and of what we now call existentialism. The poem begins with an extremely slow series of statements that I know, and I'm not poking fun at all, but when I don't mean this in I actually think it's quite cool. Often when I go to a liberal synagogue and a rabbi leads something, they'll often start with a meditation. And they'll tell me to close my eyes and sit upright and making sure my feet are on the ground and notice my breath and my legs and my weight and all this stuff. It's like a modern thing to talk that way, I think. I don't know, to say like, notice your body, right? Like, so this is the same thing, this poem. You slowly say, my longing, God, is for you. My desire and love are for you. My heart is for you. My insides are for you. My soul is for you. My breath is for you. My arms are for you. My legs are for you. My character is from you. My bones and blood are from you. My skin and my body. And actually continues. I didn't give you the whole piyut in this part, but it's slowly talking about every part. And I'll just quickly sing for you a couple of the first lines. Lecha Eli teshukati becha chashki ve'avati lecha libi vechiliotai lecha ruchi ve'nishmati. And the purpose is to go very slowly, to think about each part of your body which belongs to God. It's giving yourself over. You're about to begin a 25-hour fast. You're about to try to completely devote yourself to God over the next year. The second part, if I have to divide the song into 3 parts, is a confession. I am ashamed and I have ambushed. I have betrayed and I have scorned. I have stolen and I have robbed. And many of you are familiar with, if you've been to an Ashkenazi synagogue, the Al-Chet, we say, for this sin, I did this, and for this sin, this is very similar. It's a list of all of the things we did wrong. Ve'ashamti ve'arveti uvagadeti uvaziti ve'gazalti ve'ganavti heruti ve'irshati. Every part of the Lecha Eli has a different tune attached to it. The first part is slow. The second part is meant to sort of calm us as we acknowledge our sins. And the third part, I describe it as an existentialist part, an existential part of the Lecha Eli. What am I? What is my life? What strength do I even have? What power do I have? Like blown chaff driven away. How will you remember my mistakes? Meaning, am I a speck in your large, constellation of millions of people and billions of people that you take account for, God? I feel mute and ashamed, and my shame has covered me. And I'll ask nonetheless, even though, and it's sort of like, right, I'm sort of thinking about, thinking about major existentialist philosophers, right? Like, existence precedes essence, right? Even though life, even though there is no objective meaning in life, nonetheless, the meaning that I can construct on an individual basis is the most meaningful option available to me as a human being, right? So, even though I'm just like chaff being driven away, and what am I? Nonetheless, am I going to ask for your favor to grant my requests and wash me thoroughly? Uma ani, uma chayai, uma kochi ve'otzmati, kekash nidaf me'am nidaf, ve'ech tizkor meshugati. Meshugati is translated as power. It's also like, in modern Hebrew, craziness. So, like, how will you remember my actions, the craze that drove me? So we have about 10 minutes left. So maybe we can ask questions about Lecha Eli and if you have other questions about Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur in the North African Middle Eastern communities, I'm happy to try to answer them and speak at least from my tradition. Maybe I'll stop sharing and I can share again since we're a small group. And if there, yeah. Jay, do you have your hand up, or are you?
Yeah.
Yes, please. And I recognize the name, the Al-Hada family.
Yeah, definitely Sephardic. I was going to ask, when they do the prayer that you just did, do they do just sort of like the Al-Chet, where you when you do it wrong?
Yes, they do not. They do not. Yeah. So one kind of cool thing that I will say is, even though there is a chazan, there's a cantor, there's a distributive model of leading services. So what will often happen in such a long poem is the chazan, the cantor, will begin with the first 8 or 9 lines, and we'll try to do it as beautiful as possible. And Sephardic congregations are often organized in a circle, which is I think the Islamic, based off of, I know mosques, everyone faces one direction as well. They face Mecca, but the circle is used in architecture. So everyone sits in a circle and they can all see each other, as opposed to facing the chazan, the rabbi or the cantor. The cantor faces towards the ark, not necessarily towards any part of the congregation. So after, there's no beating, but after the cantor does it, then every congregant will take turn doing a line, and it'll just be sporadic. There won't be an order to it. It's just sort of organized chaos. Like, who is the second person, the third person, because they have the next best voices, but you don't really know who's after that. So you kind of just have to find your moment and go for it. And if 2 people go, it's embarrassing, but it actually, on a Shabbat service, it's much more organized because everybody knows what their role is. And if someone's not there, it can be confusing. But on Yom Kippur, it can be a little bit intimidating because there's some guests and you don't know who's supposed to go. But there's no but this is in the Amidah, in the I don't know the translation of Amidah, in the 18 blessings, in the main portion of the service. You do this in Al-Chet. We do say the Al-Chet for this sin and for this sin in the Sephardic community, we say that as part of the Shacharit and Musaf and Mincha and Mariv services as well. The morning, afternoon, and evening prayers as well. Yes, yeah.
I just wanted to say that thank you for introducing us to this. It's such a treasure. It seems to me that this is the most important part of Yom Kippur evening. I'm so happy that you introduced us to this, and I would like to see what I can do about finding this and maybe putting it to music.
Here's what I will do. I will put the link to the entire poem. It's very long in the chat.
And what do I do with it then?
You can read it. You can compose a song to it, I guess.
No, I can. You mean I can cut it and paste it somewhere else?
You can print it. I will send you the link to a PDF.
Oh yeah, that's perfect. A link is all I need.
Here we go.
Send it to all of us, please.
Yes, it's now in the chat.
Wow.
Yeah. Yes, Cindy. Yes.
I was going to ask a little bit more about the mechanics that you were talking about. Are people standing? Are they sitting? Are there certain times when you stand, sit? Are women part of the congregation? Do you have to be 13 to participate in? Do you have to have a bar mitzvah before? All those kinds of questions.
Yeah, these are great questions. So in a traditional North African Middle Eastern synagogue, women are not leading services or singing, and that is I believe it's reflective of the culture in those communities. It wasn't a priority in the community. It never bubbled up as a concern in those communities. So in different synagogues, in the synagogue I grew up with, women were on the top floor, and we were in a circle, and then they were in the circle above on the second floor, and they could see all of us. We sort of look up at our mom and sister and wave, and traditionally, I know this sort of is very not so progressive, but often in high holidays, people would sort of pick, who they might want to be date, sort of like they look down and identify who is an attractive bachelor, or they look up and vice versa. It's definitely not like you can't look at one or the other. I think if the rabbi saw you looking always up, they'd be like, can you keep your eyes down? But at the synagogues in San Francisco, I used to attend. I don't live in San Francisco anymore. Men were in a circle, and there was a women's section that was right beside, with a very low mechitza, with very low separation, so you could see over it. There were also curtains that you would pull aside when the rabbi was talking, or when there was anything other than a prayer service. Boys under 13 can sing. Actually, in San Francisco, they let girls under 12 sing as well. They don't let girls over 12 sing. And what else did you ask? Oh, one thing I will say that is kind of unique to my cultural heritage, and it's a custom that's been eliminated in the modern state of Israel, and it's very sad, is at the end of Yom Kippur, during the Eilath service, during the last part of the service. Let me see if I can actually pull up a picture for you. The men and women would go into the streets, and they would, men and women would sit together in the talit of the husband of the family. So the entire family would gather during the Amidah, during the actual prayer service, which I'm going to try to pull up a picture right now for you. Hold on one second. And the reason I say this is so rare is because you usually have this picture available. I can't find it right now. There was a picture that was taken by a Muslim photographer in the 60s of the great synagogue in Tunis, which is the capital of Tunisia, and of all of the families going out into the streets. And at the end of the Yom Kippur service, the husband would take his talit and would pray the final service, the Amidah, with his family under his talit. And that's super frowned upon in the modern state of Israel or in Orthodox synagogues for women and men to be together, even a husband and wife, during the Amidah. And the reason that's done is because the Torah Ark is open during the Eilath service. It's the only time you ever pray a service with the Torah open. Any other time you pray the Amidah, the Ark is closed. And it's the time when people are the most pure, and there's no reason to separate genders and sexes, in at least in the Tunisian tradition. So it was a beautiful thing, and my aunts told me about this, how they would all, my mom has lots of sisters, so they would all go together under my grandfather's talit on the service, but then I never saw it being done, and I realized that it was a tradition that was eliminated in the modern state of Israel when they were sort of trying to make people more, a little bit more, I don't know how to say this, when Orthodoxy became a little bit more fundamental, you could say. But I actually revived that practice with my family. So I have 2 daughters and a wife, and I'll pray that service with them under my talit. Even in our Orthodox congregation, I would just stand at the back and do that. So that's the only thing that women and men would be together for, at least in my community.
And will you tell me a little bit about the Jewish community in Tunisia?
Oh, sure.
Does it exist?
Oh, it still exists today, actually. It's small. It's very small, however.
What does small mean?
So there are 3,000 Jews left in Tunisia, although they're having a birth boom. I think 2,000 are under the age of 18. So there used to be 100,000 Jews in Tunisia. As many, Arab countries, there were large Jewish populations. Like Morocco had, 500,000 Jews, and you might know this. Baghdad, like 50% of the city was Jewish. The markets were closed on Saturday. And then after 1948, the communities dwindled to very small numbers. In Tunisia, my family left in the 70s, so quite late, actually. My mom was one of the last families in her small village when she left, and they left for safety reasons. It became unsafe. The Jewish community there was a combination, it's very interesting, of Jews who had been there for 2,000 years plus, who came to an island called Djerba, which is now a popular resort between Libya and Tunisia, who came during the Second Temple period. And the oldest synagogue, one of the oldest synagogues in the world, is located in Tunisia. That community was there for thousands of years. And then more Jews joined after the Spanish Inquisition from Spain, after 1492. They came first, they first went to Portugal, then Italy, then they came down to Tunisia. Very, very cool. Bukovza, yeah, wrote me a message. Very famous Tunisian family, yeah. And so the Jewish community lived in Tunisia. They were actually, initially they were very interested in being a part of the revolution when Tunisia emancipated itself from France. But then, the conflict in Israel made it untenable for the majority of Jews to live there. There were riots against Jews. A small percentage survived. And today in Djerba, which is an island, there's still a large community, like 2,800 of the 3,000 Jews in Tunisia live in Djerba. And they have schools. They have more kosher restaurants than we have in the Bay Area. They have 2 girls' schools, 2 boys' schools. There's a rabbinic academy. There's a publishing house, a Hebrew publishing house. The people in Djerba speak Hebrew fluently. Hebrew is like the language that is spoken. They even don't write even when they write in Hebrew characters if they're writing in Arabic, and they write, when they do write in Arabic, they write in Hebrew characters. I'm actually in a WhatsApp group with a synagogue in Djerba because I sometimes zoom into their, like when they have slichot, I zoom in, or I WhatsApp into their slichot at night, which is the morning for them. Like actually now, I could do it. Let's see if they started it. Usually it's pretty soon. And they write in Hebrew characters, but in Arabic sometimes, in Hebrew characters sometimes in Hebrew, which is pretty neat. So there's still a community there, and they're very a lot of tourists visit them. Actually, it's a very popular tourist destination, especially in the holiday of Lag BaOmer. Thousands of people go every year for the holiday of Lag BaOmer. because there's this beautiful synagogue here. This I can find a picture for you. I think it's the most beautiful synagogue in the world. I'll show you. It's one of the oldest and most beautiful synagogues. There's a rock. There's a rock in this synagogue that is meant to be a rock from the Second Temple. And people, my computer's just loading the picture, and people go to this, they make pilgrimage to the synagogue, and they take hard-boiled eggs. I have no idea why there's this custom. And they write the names of people who are sick, or people who they want to get married, or people who are maybe struggling to have kids. And they put it beside the rock. Here, let me show you this. It's really a gorgeous synagogue. Here, I'll show you. Let me share my screen. And then I know it's already 8, so. Can you see the synagogue?
Oh, gee, beautiful.
Yeah, it's quite ornate. Unfortunately, it was bombed in 2001 by Al Qaeda, and a number of German tourists were murdered. It was quite sad, but it was restored. Not the foundation, like nothing was actually. The roof came off, but none of the art was destroyed. It was just had to be cleaned. It was quite miraculous that it stayed intact. Yeah, it's one of the most beautiful synagogues. It's a very, very popular tourist destination. Goldsmiths, and I think that's the main profession for men. Women are running the educational field, so they mostly work in schools. But they mostly are jewelers. I think pretty much all the men there are jewelers and work in that. What's really kind of neat is the Minister of Tourism. He was just removed as Minister of Tourism, was a Jew for the last 5 years. So after the revolution, there was a real desire, after the Jasmine Revolution, there was a desire to include Jews in the new constitution and have them be represented in the government. So, and I want to wish you a Shana Tova. We say in the Sephardic tradition, Tizku l'shanim rabot v'neimot, which means may you merit many pleasant and many and pleasant years. Many pleasant years.